When my wife and I first moved into our new house in Willow Creek, it felt like a dream come true. The neighborhood was picture perfect. Neat sidewalks lined with flower beds, kids riding bikes on quiet streets, and houses that looked like they belonged in a magazine. Our home had everything we wanted. A cozy living room, a sunny kitchen, and most importantly, a big backyard. It wasn't just any backyard. It was our little slice of paradise. We imagined hosting barbecues there, planting vegetables, or simply relaxing under the shade of the trees. Life seemed perfect. But perfection has a way of crumbling when you least expect it. Not long after we settled in, I started noticing someone snooping around our property. At first, I thought maybe it was a curious neighbor or someone admiring the garden. But then, one afternoon, I caught her red-handed. Karen Harper, the head of the Homeowners Association, HOA, was standing in the middle of my backyard, clipboard in hand, inspecting every inch as if she owned the place. "Can I help you?" I asked, trying to sound polite but firm. Karen turned to me with a smile that didn't reach her eyes. "Oh, hello. Just doing a routine check," she said breezily. "Lovely space you have here." I nodded slowly, waiting for her to leave, but instead, she launched into a lecture about how important it was to maintain community standards. She pointed out imaginary flaws, a leaf here, a slightly uneven patch of grass there, as if preparing to fine us for breathing wrong. I bit my tongue and watched her go, thinking it was a one-time thing. Boy, was I wrong. Over the next few weeks, Karen kept showing up uninvited. Sometimes it was to comment on the color of our curtains, other times to remind us not to leave gardening tools outside overnight. Each visit left me more irritated than the last, but nothing prepared me for what happened next. One evening, as I watered the plants, Karen appeared again, this time flanked by two other HOA members. They stood at the edge of my yard, staring at it like it was some kind of public exhibit. "You know," Karen began, tapping her pen against her clipboard, "this backyard is technically part of the shared walking path. Technically speaking, it's community property." My jaw dropped. "Excuse me?" She shrugged like it was no big deal. "People should be able to enjoy it. It adds value to the neighborhood." Enjoy it? My backyard. The same backyard where I planned to grow tomatoes and let my dog run free. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Before I could argue, Karen smiled sweetly and walked away, leaving me fuming. That night, I told my wife about the conversation. She shook her head in disbelief. "What are we supposed to do? Put up a sign that says private property?" The idea sparked something in my mind. If Karen wanted my backyard to be public property, fine, I'd give her exactly what she asked for, but not in the way she expected. As I lay in bed, a plan started forming. A mischievous grin spread across my face. This was going to be fun. Little did Karen know, her innocent suggestion would lead to chaos, and maybe even teach her a lesson about boundaries. After all, if she thought she could claim my backyard, she clearly didn't know who she was dealing with. Karen's visits quickly became a regular and unwelcome part of my life. At first, it was just little things. She'd stroll by while I was mowing the lawn or watering the plants, casually pointing out minor issues that needed fixing. A stray leaf here, a slightly uneven patch of grass there. It was as if she carried a magnifying glass to inspect every inch of my property. Each time, she'd flash that polished smile of hers, but her eyes were sharp, calculating, like she was searching for something to criticize. Then came the day she crossed the line. I was in the backyard, planting tomato seedlings in a freshly tilled patch of soil, when I heard her voice behind me. "Lovely weather we're having, isn't it?" She chirped, stepping onto my property without so much as a knock or a hello. I turned to face her, wiping dirt from my hands. "Can I help you with something?" She tilted her head, pretending to admire the garden. "Oh, nothing urgent. Just thought I'd stop by and see how everything's coming along." Her tone was light, almost friendly, But there was an edge to it, a hint of authority that made my skin crawl. "Everything's fine," I said curtly, hoping she'd take the hint and leave. But Karen wasn't the type to back down easily. "You know," she continued, pacing slowly around the yard, "this space is technically part of the shared walking path. It borders the community area, so technically speaking." She paused dramatically, letting the words hang in the air. "Technically speaking," I prompted, already dreading where this was going. "Well," she said, turning to me with a smug grin, "it's community property. People should be able to enjoy it. After all, it adds value to the neighborhood." My jaw dropped. Community property. Enjoy it? This was my backyard. The same backyard where I planned to grow vegetables, let my dog run free, and maybe even host barbecues. And now Karen was claiming it belonged to everyone. "I'm sorry," I said, trying to keep my voice steady, "but this is private property. My private property." Karen waved her hand dismissively, as if my words were irrelevant. "Private, public, it's all semantics. Besides, sharing your space will make the neighborhood stronger. Think of it as a contribution to the greater good." The audacity of her statement left me speechless. Before I could argue further, she gave me one last sugary sweet smile and walked away, leaving me fuming. That night, I told my wife about the conversation. She listened quietly, shaking her head in disbelief. "What are we supposed to do? Put up a sign that says private property?" Her comment sparked an idea in my mind, an idea that started small but quickly grew into something bigger. If Karen wanted my backyard to be public property, fine. I'd give her exactly what she asked for, but not in the way she expected. As I lay in bed, staring at the ceiling, a mischievous grin spread across my face. This was going to be fun. Over the next few days, I began noticing subtle changes in how people treated my yard. Kids started wandering in uninvited, playing tag among my tomato plants, and leaving muddy footprints everywhere. Couples sprawled across blankets near the fence, picnicking as if they owned the place. One guy even set up a hammock between two trees without asking. Each intrusion fueled my growing frustration and my determination to fight back. But instead of confronting them directly, I bided my time, waiting for the perfect moment to strike. Because if Karen thought she could claim my backyard, she clearly didn't know who she was dealing with. Little did she know, her innocent suggestion would lead to chaos, and maybe even teach her a lesson about boundaries. The transformation of my backyard began quietly, almost innocently. At first, I told myself it was just a small project, a way to make the space more natural, as Karen had suggested when she called it community property. But deep down, I knew this wasn't about nature. It was about sending a message. I started with water. Water is peaceful, right? Soothing, even. That's what I kept telling myself as I dug shallow trenches along the edges of the yard and filled them with rainwater collected from the gutters. The ground soaked it up greedily, turning muddy and soft. To keep the water from draining away too quickly, I added plastic ponds I bought from a discount store. They weren't fancy, just big black tubs, but they worked perfectly for my plan. Next came the plants. Cattails, reeds, and thick grasses that thrive in wet soil were easy to find at the local nursery. I planted them around the edges of the ponds and trenches, letting their roots dig into the damp earth. Within days, they shot up like green skyscrapers, creating a wild, untamed look. My once manicured lawn was starting to resemble something out of a swampy fairy tale. But I didn't stop there. A swamp isn't complete without its signature soundtrack. Frogs. I ordered tadpoles online, tiny wriggling creatures that arrived in a bag smaller than my fist. When I released them into the ponds, they darted around like they'd found their forever home. It wouldn't be long before they grew legs and started croaking their nightly symphony. To add authenticity, I scattered old tires, pieces of driftwood, and rocks throughout the yard. These weren't random junk items. They were carefully placed to create hiding spots for wildlife and give the area that rugged, unkempt charm. For lighting, I hung solar-powered bug lamps above the water. Their soft glow attracted insects, which only made the whole thing feel more alive. By the end of the first week, my backyard looked nothing like it had before. Gone were the neat flower beds and trimmed grass. In their place stood a miniature swamp, buzzing with activity. Mosquitoes hovered lazily over the stagnant water. Dragonflies zipped through the air, and the occasional frog plopped into the pond with a splash. It was chaotic, messy, and utterly beautiful. Neighbors began to notice, of course. At first, they peeked over the fence, their faces showing confusion. Some asked questions, though their tone was hesitant, as if unsure whether to laugh or cry. Is that a asterisk swamp asterisk? Sarah, my next-door neighbor, finally blurted out one afternoon. She leaned against the fence, her eyes wide with disbelief. I grinned, leaning on my shovel like a proud artist unveiling his masterpiece. Sure is. Just making good use of the space. You know, for the community. Sarah blinked, clearly unsure how to respond. Well, it's certainly unique. Unique was one word for it. Another might have been ridiculous or genius, depending on who you asked. Either way, the swamp was impossible to ignore. People walking by slowed down to stare, pointing and whispering. Kids dared each other to step onto the rickety wooden bridge I'd built, giggling nervously as it wobbled under their weight. Even the mail carrier paused longer than usual, craning his neck to get a better look. Karen, however, didn't seem amused. She hadn't said anything yet, but I could tell she was watching. Her sharp eyes followed me whenever I worked in the yard, and her lips pressed into a thin line whenever she passed by. I could practically hear the gears turning in her head, trying to figure out how to shut this down. But here's the thing. I wasn't breaking any rules. Not technically. Anyway, there was nothing in the HOA handbook about turning your backyard into a swamp. And since Karen herself had declared it community property, I figured she couldn't exactly complain now. If anything, I was improving the neighborhood, adding biodiversity, encouraging wildlife, and giving everyone something to talk about. Every day, I added new touches to the swamp. Wind chimes made of rusty tin cans clinked softly in the breeze. A sign reading "Dragonfly Landing" marked one corner, while another proclaimed "Frog Chorus Point." By the time I finished, the swamp wasn't just a statement, it was an experience. And judging by the horrified looks on some of my neighbors' faces, it was working exactly as intended. It didn't take long for Karen to show up at my door. She didn't knock politely this time. Oh no, she marched right up to my porch like a general storming an enemy fortress. Behind her trailed a small group of HOA members, their faces a mix of curiosity and disapproval. They stopped just outside my front door, staring at me with expressions that ranged from confusion to outright anger. "What is the meaning of this?" Karen demanded, her voice sharp enough to cut glass. She gestured dramatically toward my backyard, as if it were some sort of crime scene. This mess violates every principle of our community guidelines." I raised an eyebrow, feigning surprise. "Mess? I thought you said my backyard was community property. Shouldn't the community decide what happens here?" Her face turned red, and for a moment, she looked like she might explode. Mr. Thompson, one of the other HOA members, stepped forward, clutching his clipboard like a lifeline. "We've received complaints," he said stiffly. "Residents are upset about the mosquitoes, the smell, and the overall unkempt appearance." Unkempt, I repeated, letting the word hang in the air. I gestured toward the swamp proudly. This is nature's way of thriving. Frogs eat pests, dragonflies control insects, and the plants filter the water. It's eco-friendly. Karen rolled her eyes so hard I thought they might get stuck. Eco-friendly. You've turned your yard into a mosquito breeding ground. People can't even walk by without being swarmed. "Well," I said with a shrug, "maybe they'll start carrying bug spray. Or better yet, stay out of the swamp." Problem solved. The group exchanged uneasy glances, clearly unsure how to respond. Karen clenched her fists, her knuckles turning white. "You're deliberately trying to provoke us," she spat. "This isn't about nature, it's about causing trouble." I tilted my head, pretending to consider her words. If I wanted to cause trouble, trust me, Karen, I could do much worse. This is actually quite tame compared to what I'm capable of. That comment seemed to hit a nerve. Her jaw tightened, and she took a step closer, lowering her voice to a dangerous whisper. "You think you're clever, don't you? Pushing boundaries, making a mockery of our rules. But mark my words, you'll regret this." "Oh, I doubt that," I replied smoothly. "I'm just following the advice of our beloved HOA president. If my backyard belongs to the community, then I'm simply enhancing it for everyone's enjoyment." Karen opened her mouth to argue but stopped herself, realizing she had no real comeback. Instead, she shot me a glare that could freeze lava before spinning on her heel and stalking off, her entourage trailing behind her like lost puppies. But the battle was far from over. Over the next few days, the backlash grew louder. Anonymous letters appeared in my mailbox, accusing me of ruining property values and poisoning the neighborhood atmosphere. Someone even left a nasty note taped to my front door. Asterisk, "Fix your yard or leave." Asterisk. At first, I laughed it off. These were the same people who'd happily trampled through my tomato plants and sprawled across my lawn when they thought it was a public park. Now that I'd given them exactly what they wanted, they acted like I'd committed a crime. Still, the pressure mounted. The HOA sent formal notices, each more threatening than the last. Fines piled up, though I ignored them. I knew they couldn't enforce anything unless I broke actual rules. Neighbors avoided eye contact when they passed me on the street, whispering behind cupped hands. Some even crossed the street to avoid walking too close to my house. Despite all the drama, I refused to back down. Every morning, I'd sip coffee on my porch, watching the chaos unfold with quiet satisfaction. Kids dared each other to throw rocks into the ponds, only to scream and run away when a frog leaped out. Couples who used to picnic near my fence now gave my yard a wide berth, wrinkling their noses at the sight of murky water and buzzing insects. Even Sarah, my neighbor who'd once called the swamp unique, started avoiding me. When I waved hello, she forced a tight smile and hurried inside, as if afraid association with me might rub off on her. Through it all, Karen watched from afar, simmering with frustration. I could see it in the way she paced along the walking path, glaring at my yard like it had personally insulted her. She tried rallying support from other residents, organizing meetings to discuss the swamp issue. But attendance was sparse. Most people either didn't care enough to get involved or secretly enjoyed seeing Karen squirm. One evening, as I sat on my porch listening to the Frogs' nightly concert, I spotted Karen pacing back and forth near the edge of my property. She muttered to herself, occasionally pointing at the swamp like it was a personal affront. I almost felt sorry for her. For all her power trips and rule enforcing, she'd finally met someone who wouldn't bend. Things escalated quickly after Karen's failed attempts to intimidate me. She wasn't the kind of person to back down quietly, and I knew she'd find a way to retaliate. Sure enough, it didn't take long for her next move. A neighborhood meeting called urgently to address the growing concerns about my backyard swamp. Flyers appeared on every doorstep, complete with bold letters proclaiming, asterisk, "Your voice matters." Asterisk. The day of the meeting arrived, and I strolled into the community center with a cup of coffee in hand, ready for whatever Karen had planned. The room buzzed with tension as neighbors filed in, their faces a mix of curiosity and apprehension. Karen sat at the front, surrounded by other HOA members, her clipboard clutched tightly like a weapon. When she spotted me entering, her lips curled into a smug smile, as if she'd already won. Once everyone settled, Karen stood up and cleared her throat. "Thank you all for coming," she began, her tone dripping with forced sweetness. "As many of you know, we've been facing challenges due to certain irregularities in our neighborhood. Specifically, one resident has chosen to disregard the spirit of our community guidelines I transforming their backyard into something entirely inappropriate. She paused dramatically, letting her words sink in. A few heads turned toward me, some glaring, others looking more curious than angry. I leaned back in my chair, sipping my coffee casually, pretending not to notice. Karen continued, pacing slowly across the stage. This isn't just about aesthetics or property values. It's about safety and respect for shared spaces. Mosquitoes are spreading. Children are afraid to play outside, and residents are complaining about the unpleasant smells. We need to come together as a community to resolve this issue. Her speech went on for what felt like forever, filled with vague accusations and dramatic pauses. But when she opened the floor for discussion, no one spoke at first. The silence stretched uncomfortably until finally, Mr. Thompson raised his hand hesitantly. "I think we should give him a chance to explain," he said, glancing nervously between me and Karen. "After all, maybe there's a reason behind." The swamp. Karen's face darkened, but she nodded stiffly. "Very well. Let's hear from the homeowner." I stood up, setting my coffee aside. For a moment, I let the room sit in silence, feeling the weight of everyone's stares. Then I began, speaking calmly but firmly. When Karen declared my backyard community property, I took her at her word. I decided to create something that truly benefits the neighborhood. A natural habitat. Frogs eat pests. Dragonflies control mosquitoes. Plants filter water. It's functional, educational, and eco-friendly. A murmur rippled through the crowd. Some people nodded thoughtfully. Others looked skeptical. Karen crossed her arms, clearly unimpressed. "But what about the smell?" Someone called out. "And the mosquitoes." "Fair points," I admitted. "But those are temporary issues. With proper management, the water can stay clean, and mosquito populations will decrease. Besides, isn't it better than pesticides and chemicals?" Before anyone could respond, Sarah, the neighbor who'd once called my swamp unique, spoke up hesitantly. "Actually, I've noticed fewer bugs around my yard lately, and the frogs are kinda cool. My kids love watching them." Her comment sparked a ripple of agreement among a few others. One man chimed in, "Yeah, it's different, but it's not the end of the world." Another added, "It's kinda nice having real nature instead of fake grass everywhere." Karen's expression shifted from smugness to panic. She tried to regain control, raising her voice slightly. "This isn't about personal preferences, it's about maintaining standards." But her argument fell flat. People were starting to see through her facade. They weren't blind to how controlling she'd become, micromanaging every aspect of their lives under the guise of community improvement. Even Mr. Thompson seemed uneasy, avoiding eye contact with her. By the time the meeting ended, the atmosphere had shifted. While not everyone supported my swamp, they agreed it wasn't worth tearing the neighborhood apart over. Karen stormed out, visibly fuming, while others lingered to chat about finding a compromise. As I walked home that night, I couldn't help but smile. Karen had underestimated me. And now, cracks were forming in her carefully constructed kingdom. Whatever happened next, one thing was clear: the tide was turning. The fallout from the meeting was both immediate and unexpected. Karen, who had always been the self-appointed queen of Willow Creek, suddenly found herself on shaky ground. Her authority, once unquestioned, was now being openly challenged, not just by me, but by other residents too. People started talking behind her back, questioning why she felt the need to meddle in everyone's lives. Some even joked about how my swamp had become the most interesting part of the neighborhood. But Karen wasn't about to go down without a fight. The very next morning, an official letter arrived in my mailbox. It was from the HOA, written in formal language that reeked of desperation. They demanded I restore my backyard to its original state within 30 days or face legal action. Attached was a list of fines, outrageous amounts meant to scare me into submission. I laughed when I read it. Legal action. Over a swamp. I'd done my research carefully before starting this project. As long as I wasn't violating any city ordinances or zoning laws, and I wasn't. They couldn't touch me. Still, Karen clearly hoped the threat of lawyers and courtrooms would force me to cave. Instead, I decided to escalate things further. If they wanted a war, I'd give them one, but on my terms. That weekend, I added new features to the swamp. A rickety wooden bridge spanned one of the larger ponds, complete with deliberately wobbly planks that groaned underfoot. Signs popped up everywhere. Caution, slippery surface, watch your step, and my personal favorite, enter at your own risk. For extra flair, I hung wind chimes made of old tin cans and silverware, their clinking adding an eerie soundtrack to the already chaotic scene. Then came the pièce de résistance, a raccoon trap. Not because I wanted to catch anything. Mind you, it was more for show. I placed it near the edge of the walking path, baited with marshmallows. Within hours, a curious raccoon wandered in, only to get stuck. Of course, I'd alerted animal control beforehand, knowing exactly what would happen. By evening, neighbors gathered around as the poor creature was safely released back into the wild. But the incident became the talk of the town. Did you hear? There's a raccoon problem in that swamp. It's disgusting. What if it carries diseases? Honestly, I'm scared to walk past his house now. Karen seized the opportunity, spreading rumors about health hazards and safety risks. She even called the city inspectors, hoping they'd shut me down. When they showed up a few days later, clipboard in hand, I greeted them warmly, offering coffee and a guided tour of the swamp. "See this," I said, pointing to the ponds. "They're filled with rainwater collected from gutters, eco-friendly and completely legal." I gestured toward the plants. "These are native species that support local wildlife. And the frogs, they're natural pest controllers." The inspectors exchanged glances, clearly unimpressed by Karen's claims. One of them scribbled notes while another took photos. After an hour of poking around, they concluded their visit with a simple suggestion: manage the mosquito population better, which I was already doing, and ensure the water stayed clean. As they left, Karen hovered nearby, practically vibrating with frustration. "You can't keep doing this," she hissed under her breath. "You'll ruin everything." "Ruin what?" I replied innocently. "The illusion of control, because it seems like that ship has sailed." Her face flushed red, and for the first time, I saw genuine fear in her eyes. She knew she was losing, not just this battle, but her grip on the neighborhood. Without saying another word, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing victorious amidst the chaos. Word spread quickly after that. Neighbors who had once avoided me began stopping by to chat, some sheepishly admitting they admired my defiance. Others confessed they were tired of Karen's constant meddling. Slowly but surely, the tide was turning. Rules relaxed. Mailboxes started appearing in brighter colors. Flower beds sprouted unconventional designs. Laughter returned to the streets. And Karen, well, she resigned as HOA president shortly afterward, citing personal reasons. No one shed a tear when she moved away, unable to stomach living next door to a man-made marshland. Now, sitting on my porch with a cold drink, I watched dragonflies dart above the water and listened to the frogs' nightly chorus. Life is messy, unpredictable, and sometimes downright absurd. But isn't that what makes it worth living? Sometimes fighting back means embracing the chaos. And let me tell you, there's nothing quite as satisfying as turning your oppressor's demands into their worst nightmare. With Karen gone and the HOA's iron grip loosened, Willow Creek began to breathe again. The neighborhood that had once felt like a museum of perfection slowly transformed into something more alive, more human. People started reclaiming their individuality, painting their homes in bold colors, planting wildflowers instead of manicured hedges, and even hosting impromptu block parties. It was as if a weight had been lifted, and everyone could finally relax. As for my swamp, it stayed, though over time, it evolved into something surprisingly beautiful. The murky water cleared up thanks to the plants filtering it naturally. Dragonflies flitted gracefully above the surface, their iridescent wings catching the sunlight. Frogs croaked their nightly symphony, a sound that became oddly comforting. Birds nested in the cattails, chirping cheerfully each morning. What had started as an act of defiance turned into a thriving little ecosystem, and oddly enough, a source of pride. Neighbors who had initially hated the idea began warming up to it. Kids would stop by to watch tadpoles wriggle in the ponds or giggle at the sight of frogs leaping into the water. Parents brought them over on weekends, turning the swamp into an impromptu nature lesson. Sarah joked that I should charge admission fees since so many people came to see it. "You've got the only backyard zoo in town," she teased one afternoon while admiring the dragonflies. Even the raccoon incident worked in my favor. After the initial panic died down, some residents admitted they found it amusing. One guy even joked that he'd never seen so much excitement in the neighborhood before. "Guess we needed a little chaos to spice things up," he said with a laugh. The walking path behind my house, which Karen had once used as justification for her claim on my yard, became busier than ever, but not because people were cutting through my property anymore. Instead, they'd pause to admire the swamp, snapping photos or pointing out interesting creatures. Strangers complimented me on my creative landscaping, unaware of the drama that had sparked its creation. Some even asked for advice on how to create similar habitats in their own yards. Karen's departure marked the beginning of a new chapter for Willow Creek. Without her micromanaging every detail, the HOA meetings grew shorter and less frequent. Rules relaxed, allowing residents to express themselves without fear of fines or judgment. Flower beds sprouted unconventional designs. Brightly painted mailboxes popped up along the streets. Laughter returned to the air, replacing the tense silence that had hung over the neighborhood for years. For me, the swamp became a symbol of standing up for what you believe in, even when it feels impossible. It taught me that sometimes fighting back doesn't mean shouting louder or being cruel. It means using creativity and humor to turn your opponent's demands against them. By giving Karen exactly what she asked for, a public space, I exposed the absurdity of her rules and showed everyone just how ridiculous they truly were. Now, sitting on my porch with a cup of tea, I watch the sunset reflect off the shimmering surface of the swamp. Life is messy, unpredictable, and often chaotic. But isn't that what makes it worth living? My backyard may not be perfect, but it's real. And sometimes, real is better than perfect. Every now and then, someone asks me if I regret turning my yard into a swamp. I always smile and shake my head. "Not for a second," I reply, because in the end, it wasn't just about beating Karen or defying the HOA. It was about proving that life doesn't have to fit inside neat little boxes or perfectly manicured lawns. Sometimes, the best things grow in the messiest places.